Howdy folks, and welcome back to War Thunder with the mighty Jingles. As you're probably aware, there has been a major new patch for War Thunder, released last week, and it brings several new things to the game, not least of which are the first Tier 6 vehicles, one of which is the T-64. I was very surprised to hear that War Thunder were introducing Cold War vehicles like the T-64, like the NVT-70 into the game, because War Thunder, like World of Tanks before it, always, well up until now at least, drew the line at vehicles that were armoured with composite armour and had smoothbore guns capable of firing anti-tank guided missiles. Well, they've stepped over that line with the introduction of the Tier 6 vehicles. Tanks like this are a revolutionary rather than evolutionary step forward over previous designs like, for example, the Centurion, the Conqueror, the M48, the T-55 and the T-62. A lot of these designs were very, very good tanks, but there was nothing really revolutionary about them. If you look at Soviet tank designs from World War II on, there's a logical progression to the design. The T-34 led to the T-34-85, which was just a T-34 with a bigger gun and a larger turret, which led to the T-44, which itself was based on the T-34-85. Post-war tanks like the T-54-55 and the T-62 certainly looked different, and they were better tanks, but all that had really changed was the addition of a bigger gun. The technology that went into making tanks like the T-62 and the T-55 hadn't really advanced that far since World War II. They still had homogeneous steel armour, they still had rifled guns. All of that changed with the introduction of the T-64. This was a tank that contained such radical new technology that it was never exported to Soviet client states. If you were to check the inventory of just about any Middle Eastern country, you'll see numerous T-55s, T-62s, T-72s, even some T-80s, but you won't see a single T-64. The only Soviet partner state that was deemed politically and militarily reliable enough to be equipped with T-64s were selected tank regiments of the East German Army, mostly because they were right on the border with NATO. Other than that, only Red Army units were allowed to be equipped with this tank. And not just any old Red Army tank regiments either, the ones in the Western Soviet military districts, the ones that were going to have to get involved in the lion's share of the fighting if the Cold War ever turned hot. So what was it about this tank that was so revolutionary? Well, mostly it's to do with the armour. During the 1950s, the primary threat to Soviet tanks was judged to be shaped charge warheads, whether these were high explosive anti-tank shells or the new guided anti-tank missiles that were starting to come into service. A variety of laminate armours were studied to protect the glacis plate of Soviet tanks. These usually consisted of a basic outer and inner layer of rolled homogeneous steel armour with a sandwich of materials in between. Range testing found that when a shaped charge warhead detonated against a laminate armour array, the hypersonic jet of metal particles was gradually bent and diverted as it passed through the various layers. Materials that were studied included aluminium, titanium, plastics and ceramics. Ultimately, the Soviets settled on a laminate of 80mm of steel armour on the outside, followed by two 52mm layers of fiberglass and a final 20mm layer of steel. So that was it for the glacis plate. Turret armour, on the other hand, was a little bit more complex because it had to protect against both kinetic energy projectiles, such as high-velocity armour-piercing, fin-stabilised discarding sabot, as well as shaped charge attacks. Now, you could use laminates, but the Soviet Research and Design Bureau found two other solutions to be a lot more attractive in terms of weight and volume. The simplest was to create a thick cavity in the front of the turret that was filled with aluminium. This combination began with an outside layer of 50mm of steel, followed by 330mm of aluminium, and finally the innermost layer of 100mm of cast steel. Now, this would significantly degrade the penetration of shaped charge warheads, but a more promising technique, which was tested in early 1961, was to suspend a matrix of ceramic balls in the cavity. During range tests, this type of ceramic combination armour provided complete protection against 85 and 100mm high explosive anti-tank projectiles, complete protection against 115mm APFSDS kinetic energy projectiles, and 75% protection from 115mm high explosive anti-tank projectiles. The only problem was that it was very, very tricky to manufacture. In some cases, the molten steel that was poured into the cast would melt the wires and springs that were holding the ceramic balls in the correct position, which meant that the balls would congregate at the bottom of the mould instead of being spaced evenly in front. There was no real practical way to determine when this was happening during the casting process, so the ceramic ball composite armour, although it was more effective, was dropped in favour of other types of fillings, like the aluminium cavity armour. Another innovation on the T-64, which has caused great amusement within the War Thunder community when pictures of the tank first appeared, are these simple lightweight flipper paddles. They were nicknamed Iloshka, or Christmas trees, and they were developed using sheets of resin-impregnated fabric that was reinforced with thin steel plates. They would fold against the side of the tank during travel, and then they'd be flipped out in combat. They're represented here in War Thunder by very simple 3mm thick aluminium plates. They wouldn't even stop a bullet, but what they will do is cause a shaped charge warhead, either a high explosive anti-tank shell or an anti-tank guided missile, to detonate before hitting the hull armour on the side of the tank. So that's all well and good, but your new tank is also going to need a new gun. There was a lot of anxiety in the Soviet army in 1958 and 1959 when it was discovered that NATO was beginning to deploy the powerful new British 105mm gun. And at the same time, a new generation of thickly armoured NATO tanks was beginning to appear, like the M60 and the Chieftain. Soviet tank specialists recognised that the new 100mm D-54T gun couldn't penetrate the M60 or the Chieftain from the front. In 1959, it was proposed that a smoothbore variant of this gun be developed, which would allow the gun to fire the brand new armour-piercing, fin-stabilised discarding Sabo 115mm projectile. It was believed that this projectile could penetrate the glacis of the M60 at 800 metres and the Chieftains at 500 metres, and it could defeat the turret front of both tanks at 2,800 metres. This was the gun that went into the T-62. The T-64 is not the first Soviet tank to use a smoothbore main gun. That honour goes to the T-62. But there were two problems with the T-62 tank. It was basically just a T-55 upgraded with a 115mm gun. There were no improvements in protection or mobility, and it was still inferior to the new NATO tanks like the M60 and the Chieftain. In particular, the T-62 could be penetrated by NATO tanks at ranges beyond those at which its own 115mm gun could penetrate them. Soviet assessments were that the NATO 105mm guns could penetrate the T-62 glacis and turret front at 3,000 metres. Unfortunately, 115mm smoothbore guns were all that the Soviets had available at the time, and the modified version of this 115mm gun, known as the D-68, was the gun that went into the initial production versions of the T-64. This gun was never going to be anything more than a stopgap, however, until a more powerful gun was ready, and at least 3 different guns were being considered for this requirement, starting in June 1961. 2 125mm smoothbore guns, the D-81 and the D-85, as well as a rifled 122mm D-83. Development of the rifled gun was very quickly abandoned. The smoothbore 125mm D-85 had a phenomenal initial muzzle velocity of 2,000 meters per second, but it was complicated and expensive to mass produce. The D-81, meanwhile, still had a fairly impressive muzzle velocity of 1,745 meters per second and was a lot more simple and cheap to mass produce. So the D-81 gun, also known as the 2A46 125mm smoothbore tank gun, was the one that was selected for mass production on the T-64. And that is the gun that we have here in War Thunder. And taking this revolutionary new Soviet main battle tank out for a spin for us today, because I haven't unlocked it yet, come on, give me a break, it costs an arm and a leg to research, is Wacky Sparrow in a realistic battle on the relatively new Japan map. Tier 6 tanks in action at long last. You lot certainly haven't been shy in sending your brand new Tier 6 tank replays in, I've seen a couple in the MBT-70, which is available in two variants, the German and the American version, the T-64 and the BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicle. The BMP-1 match in particular was fairly impressive, because let's face it, the BMP was never designed to fight tanks. It's an infantry fighting vehicle. It's a battle taxi. The T-64, obviously, main battle tank. Its purpose was to defeat NATO main battle tanks. So watching a T-64 shoot up a whole bunch of tanks is, well, it's what it's designed to do. When you see somebody doing the same thing in a BMP-1, but Jingles, the BMP-1 was equipped with anti-tank guided missiles. Well, yes it was, but do you know what the commander had to do to reload that missile after they'd fired it? He had to pop open the turret hatch, lean out, have somebody pass a spare missile up to him, and then manually reposition it on the launching rail. Speaking of anti-tank guided missiles, Wacky Sparrow has just knocked out his very first MBT-70, although technically it's the German version. I'm seeing this a lot in War Thunder. Look at the anti-tank guided missile spam coming in here. The MBT-70 and the German version of it both have the option of firing anti-tank guided missiles from the 152mm smoothbore gun mounted in that tank. And so, of course, that's all everybody does. But the turret armour of the T-64 is specifically designed to defeat shaped charge warheads. Count the number of ATGMs that get fired straight into the front of the turret of Wacky Sparrow's T-64A in this match. He's taken 2 so far. That's a non-penetration. MBT-70 over there. More anti-tank guided missiles going in. I have, by the way, enabled vehicle markers for this particular replay. So you may find yourself at certain points throughout the course of this video going, look, there's a tank right there. Why isn't he shooting it? The thing is, in realistic battle, you only see vehicle markers once a vehicle has been spotted. If you enable markers in a replay, then they're visible all the time. So you're going to be aware of things that Wacky Sparrow was not aware of at the time he was actually playing this battle, so just bear that in mind. One thing that I'm not entirely sure of is exactly what ammunition Wacky Sparrow is using in this match. It's difficult to tell just from looking at the icon. One thing that he is definitely not using are anti-tank guided missiles. The T-64A was entirely capable, because it had a smoothbore gun, of firing anti-tank guided missiles from the main gun. You don't get that option in War Thunder. You do with the MBT-70, you do with the KPZ-70, I think is the German version of the same tank. You don't get it on the T-64A. What you do get are 2 different flavours of armour-piercing, fin-stabilised, discarding sabot, and you just knocked out another tank. And I think 2 different versions of high-explosive anti-tank ammunition, as well as high-explosive fragmentation. Now the thing about high-explosive anti-tank ammunition, and he doesn't have any loaded in this game because, well, he's a Tier 6 vehicle, so he's likely to be facing other Tier 6 vehicles that have composite armour designed to defeat shaped charge ammunition. But if he was to equip the high-explosive anti-tank ammo, it would have 440mm of penetration against rolled homogeneous steel armour, significantly less against laminate or composite armour, but it has that 440mm of penetration at all ranges. It's not affected by range. You see, the magic happens with a shaped charge warhead at the point of impact. It's the same penetration regardless of whether your target's 40 metres away or 2,000 metres away. It's definitely not the same for his kinetic energy projectiles, which is all he has loaded. Well, he's got some high explosive fragmentation as well, but he's not really using it. Bang! Another target knocked out using the AFPS-DS. Armour-piercing, fin-stabilised discarding sabot. The penetration values for that ammunition does depend on the range and the angle at which you strike the target. I can't tell just from looking at the icon whether or not he's using the default standard ammunition load or whether or not he's upgraded to the enhanced AFPS-DS ammo. But what I can tell you about it, remember, high explosive anti-tank shaped charge ammunition has 440mm of penetration against steel armour at all ranges. but the default AFPSDS ammunition only has 285mm of penetration against the flat side of a target at a range of 1000 meters. So that's the 3BM9 ammunition which you do get when you unlock the tank. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, wow. Kiss goodbye to a chieftain. Look at that, he popped the turret right off him. That there was a chieftain basically giving up every advantage that he had. The advantages of the chieftain, particularly the Mark 10 chieftain, which is now available in War Thunder as a Tier 6 main battle tank, with the Stillbrew armour package, basically means that its turret is impenetrable, and its upper glacis is pretty damn tough as well. Lower glacis, a weakness. Side armour, a weakness. If the chieftain had stayed on the ridgeline and gone hull down, he might have been able to, well, would have, should have, could have, didn't. He gave the side armour to the 125mm gun of the T-64 at point blank range, and he paid the price. Oh, you'll note that, oh, that was a good shot, well done. Split the hole right open. But you'll note that one of the Aloshka panels at the front of the tank there has, well, it's basically done its job. It's been blown right off after absorbing probably one of those anti-tank guided missiles fired by the MBT-70s earlier. But yes, we were talking, I keep getting sidetracked, we were talking about the ammunition. So the default ammunition for this tank is armour-piercing, fin-stabilised, discarding sabot. It's the 3BM9 ammunition, and at 1000 meters it has 285mm of penetration. If he has managed to upgrade the ammunition, then he's using the 3BM12 ammunition, which has 351mm of penetration at 1000 meters. It even has 327mm of penetration at 2000 meters. And of course the benefit about using a kinetic energy penetrator as opposed to a shaped charge warhead is that while the penetration does fall off with range, it's pretty much equally good against homogeneous rolled steel armour, composite armour, or laminate armour. You do get some extra benefit from composite or laminate armour, but nowhere near as much benefit against a traditional kinetic energy penetrator like AFPSDS as you do against shaped charge warheads like high explosive anti-tank or guided missiles. The ironic thing is that if either of those MBT-70s had bothered firing armour-piercing ammunition at Wacky Sparrow's T-64 instead of just derping anti-tank guided missiles with shaped charge warheads right into the front of his turret and his laminate armoured hull, there's a fairly good chance they could have taken him out in the first few minutes of this match. But, well, you know, could have, should have, would have, didn't. So, they're dead and he isn't. Did I see something on the top of the hill there? Again, remember that just because we can see the marker of the tank, that doesn't mean... Oh well, somebody can definitely see him. Yep, there he is. It's a Leopard 1. I see you. Can't shoot you, but I see you. Giving his position away. Or has he? Because if you have a look at the map, there's no marker appearing to indicate the presence of an enemy tank. He definitely knows there's something up there though, because somebody just took a shot at him. So while he's not sure of the precise location of that Leopard, he does know that there's somebody... Oh, look at this. Seriously? Could the T-64 really do this? I know that was one of the very, very good things about the Churchill, the British World War II era tank. It was slow, but it had a very, very powerful engine with lots and lots of torque, and in low gear you could climb hills like no other tank in the world with the Churchill. I'm not entirely sure a T-64A could do the same, but well, it must be able to do it. Look, it's in colour. So it must be real. Well, anyway, yeah, he's done it. What's he aiming at here? Oh, enemy tanks in the field, just sitting in the open. Oh, he's hit. Yeah, his tracks have absorbed it. And those Iloshka panels on the right-hand side of the tank are still in place. And there's another hit. Not quite sure what's shooting at him, but it seems to be mostly ineffective. Let's go and get that Leopard. He's pissed us off. Yeah, he knows he's there now. And the Leopard just doesn't seem to be able to bring the gun around fast enough. There's an engine fire, and he's brewing up nicely. Second shot knocks out the crew. Impressed by the rate of fire of the 125mm gun on the T-64. This tank had an autoloader system. Only had a crew of 3. Commander, the gunner, and the driver. Didn't need a loader. The main gun was loaded by an automatic cassette autoloading system. A very complicated automatic loading system because, like on the Chieftain, the ammunition fired by the T-64 was in 2 parts. There was the propellant bag charge and the penetrator. That, of course, is where the similarities with the Chieftain end, because the Chieftain did not have an automatic loading system. The Chieftain instead was equipped with a Mark I British Army loader, usually equipped with really big arms to ram that bag charge and the penetrator warhead home. There were certain advantages, of course, to having an autoloader system. You required less crew in the tank, for one thing, so the fighting compartment didn't have to be as big, which means you can have a smaller and lighter tank. Believe it or not, the T-64 was actually smaller and lighter than a lot of World War II tanks, including the Panther, the M26 Pershing, or even post-war tanks like the Centurion. And of course, with an autoloader, you can have a higher sustained rate of fire than that of a tank that is not equipped with an autoloader. Because even a Mark I British Army loader issued with extra big arms gets a little bit tired after a couple of minutes of ramming those bag charges and penetrators home into the breech of the Chieftain's 120mm gun. However, it should be noted that the initial rate of fire from a well-trained loader in a Chieftain, for example, even manhandling 2-part ammunition into the breech of his gun, a well-trained loader could manage a much faster initial rate of fire than any tank equipped with an autoloader, like the T-64. And I think that's just about it for this particular realistic battle. 8 kills. That's not bad. Not bad by anybody's standards. Wacky Sparrow in the T-64A. Brand new Tier 6 main battle tank here in War Thunder. It does seem to be a rather good tank. It bloody well should be, considering how revolutionary and closely guarded a secret it was when it was first introduced into service. Way back in the 1960s, and this tank, believe it or not, was still in frontline service with Soviet tank regiments well into the 1980s, despite competition from the T-72 and the T-80. This was a very, very good tank. And oh dear, I think that LA-7 has just gotten a little bit too enthusiastic, chasing after the Tempest. He's just had his wings shot off. Enemy airfield flak. It's for winners. That's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. And if I've got anything wrong, then you know the routine by now. Leave your corrections in the comments. In the meantime, take care, and I'll catch you next time.